This is a chapter review for Vinland Saga, chapter 206, Thousand Year Voyage, part 15. This chapter managed to completely upend everything I thought was happening. But we'll get into that in a moment. Let's talk about my previous expectations. So, I expected two things from this chapter. Absolutely, the first death of the war. I had a very good feeling that this was it. Everything was culminating in death and the war starting. On top of that, I also thought the birth of Gudrid's child would be in this chapter as well. I specifically hoped that these two events would happen in parallel by having this duality of, life and death. First life in Vinland and first death of the first war here in Vinland. It all seemed to make a lot of sense, and just having them occur at the same time with all the build up towards both of them would create such a powerful moment that I knew Yukimura would want to capitalize on. As for how the war would start in this chapter, I thought that Hild's decision to posture for violence in this situation from the beginning would be the mistake that would result in death. After she didn't make any moves last chapter, and the situation seemed temporarily calm because of Thorfinn's declaration to leave, I thought that she would be maybe spotted in the tree line and essentially be used as a means of sparking violence. And this is kind of based on the fact that the warriors have already been gathered with this expectation of getting what they came for, getting the valuables that the Norse have, and getting their payment, essentially. And like Muin said, they probably wouldn't be happy with simply leaving just because Thorfinn said that he would leave. So they would attack with really any given reason. So I thought Hild would either be forced to defend herself or maybe would die before she could even do so. And I believe in that moment we would see if Hild was ever truly capable of taking a life as she always threatened to, or if her fear and pain only made her think she could. Well, I was absolutely convinced that Hild's choice would result in significant consequences that would begin this war. So, let's begin the read-through. And immediately, the chapter opens with this cover page and a complete shock I did not see coming at all. A group of new warriors are already approaching the village. Immediately, this chapter tells me that everything I thought I saw coming is not exactly as it seemed, and there are far more factors at play than just what was right in front of me. At their house, Gudrid is going through a very difficult labor. The women helping her through this process tell her she's almost there, but Gudrid just continues to cry out in pain. One of the nurses here comments that it seems the child will be born tonight, 10 days early, as Gudrid cries for Thorfinn. Cordelia, of course, continues to help as she has been, bringing clean cloths here. And one of the women, she starts directing Cordelia on further steps to help, but suddenly she just stops, like she has some realization. And then she pushes Cordelia and Carly out, followed by Mama, saying that men need to get out. So we can see here, Cordelia naturally just does these, quote, womanly things, these things we consider traditionally feminine in culture, and this causes the other women to naturally perceive her as such in the moment until they realize that they just can't accept that, and that they must force her to leave in order to uphold these societal rules that Cordelia wished to escape from to begin with. Cordelia nervously allows the two of them to just kind of get kicked out here. So outside the house, Carly proposes that they make a campfire so he can wait for the baby to be born. Cordelia is concerned about the cold, but Carly says, yeah, he's fine. So they make a fire. Carly says he isn't sleepy at all, and he will just cheer Gudrun on from outside until the baby comes. He cheers, "You could do it, Mom." But Cordelia asks, "Don't you have to sleep?" And again, no, he insists. He's not sleepy at all. Excitedly, Carly says he's gonna have a baby brother here and that he's gonna take really good care of him. And then immediately on the next page, we see Carly fast asleep laying against Mama. Cordelia smiles and picks Carly up, responding to Mama's woof with an invitation for her to come as well. And as she does this, she notices something in the distance. She sees light pouring out from the neighboring house, and in its path, a Norse man being speared to death by Ulnu warriors. War has begun in Vinland. Dead on the ground lays a villager. This appears to be Flot, the Markland survivor who just got here, just survived, and what he perceived as an attack on Markland as well, and now he's laying dead on the ground in another attack he didn't even see coming. In the home he ran from lay more dead villagers, surrounded by the party of Ulnu warriors who took their lives. The warriors searched the home for valuables, fascinated by the metal pot over the fire, but even more interested in the small kitchen knife, indicating that metal blades are primarily what they were looking for. They are even shown to be interested in the weaving here, but clearly it is more of a spectacle than something they really consider valuable. The warrior who picked up the kitchen knife asks another warrior named Gaoki if he can keep it. Gaoki turns, and the expression mixed with this imposing shadow on the wall he casts tells us this is someone to fear. Considering he was asked permission to take that knife, we can assume he is the leader of this band. He tells the other warrior to do whatever he wants. He does not need that little one. What he really wants is what he calls a miskik wukhan. Considering all of the context here, we can tell that this man has come in search of Ivar's sword that he heard about from Misekpukwe. On the ground near him lays a Norse woman. From the look of it, it appears she's pregnant, just like Gudrun. And she's still alive, but the pouring blood from the wound on her gut shows she will not be much longer. Gaoki yells at her, asking if any of the houses have big knives. She weakly looks up at him as he continues to describe the weapon he wants in language she cannot even understand. He says that what he's looking for is something awesome that can cut right through a person's wrist, showing us that Misek's plan to use this wound to create fear has instead resulted in drawing out warriors who wish to wield that same power. Her strength leaves her body, and the Norse woman passes. As Gaoki complains about the language barrier, one of the other warriors warns him not to get too close because of the disease. Gaoki turns to him, saying that the disease doesn't matter as long as he gets the knife. He comments on how the other tribes are playing buddy-buddy at that meeting right now, but they'll be over it soon enough. And with this, we realize that this is a tribe acting on their own accord in their own interests, trying to get ahead of their own peers by claiming the powerful weapons first. The warriors lay all the metal objects they found on the ground outside, saying that they don't have time to search more thoroughly and that it seems this house does not have what they are looking for. Gaoki considers for a moment, agrees to move on, and they burn down the home as Cordelia watches from Gudrun's. One of the warriors says to Gauki, "What if you just burnt it up?" referring to the sword. And he responds with, "That would suck." And this small line shows they really don't understand what they're even looking for. Not really fully getting that metal won't just burn up in fire. But the warrior continues, saying that the fire will bring Nords to them. And you can see from these wavy speech bubbles, while Gauki seem more sharp, and with the context of his questions being concerns about Gauki's decisions, this is a far more nervous person compared to Gauki. But Gauki, not nervous at all, says that the Nords coming is exactly what he wants. He looks to pick their next treasure hunting target, and picks out the nearby house lit up by Carly's campfire. As the warriors move towards them, Cordelia's face is overcome with dread, holding the defenseless Carly asleep in her arms and the vulnerable Gudrid giving birth inside the home. Cordelia has to make a choice. Back at the war meeting, Thorfinn faces Misekbukwe and Muin, following his declaration to leave Vinland. Misekbukwe, in good faith, for the first time, listens to Thorfinn's request and agrees to hold off their attack until spring. Immediately, Muin turns and says he can't just decide that on his own. Now Misek is the one on the receiving end of the same kind of words that have been thrown at Thorfinn this whole time, both by Ivar and now even by Einar. Muin says that it would be a mistake to give them more than half a year, and that they should attack now. Misek tells him an attack is their last resort, and that it would be better to end the conflict without it, and make no risk of getting sick. Again, his words echo Thorfinn, violence is the last resort, but he fails to realize that his efforts to create this war cannot be undone. There is a reason why Thorfinn does not consider violence an option, and that is because it is doing that makes it truly the last resort. Misek can say here that it's the last resort, but he only says that when he is in the moment and he thinks he's able to choose, but he can't. He chose violence long ago by even considering it an option. Muin continues against him, saying that with their powerful weapons, the Norse will not leave quietly, and instead will take this time that they are being granted to fortify themselves. He declares that they must surprise attack and exterminate them now, and this begins to get a stir from the warriors listening. These lines from Muin are impactful, despite his true intentions to make their claim of the weapons. Considering Ivar's faction, and even what Einar is saying now, he's also not wrong that they will likely not just leave, as Thorfinn says. Just as this arc has always been, everybody is both right and wrong. Noticing this argument, Thorfinn asks what's going on. Bug Eyes can't keep up with the fast talking, but Nisquaji nervously tells them what's happening. She says that Misekbukwe says they won't fight, but Muin wants to fight and take their things. Misek acknowledges the reality that Muin really wants the big knife that cut off his hand, and Muin accepts that accusation and tells Misek that only a righteous person like himself should have power like that and use it to preserve order. Yukimura intentionally uses that same wording of righteousness to call back to Thorfinn's line saying there is no righteous violence, showing that this is the reality of those who see their violence as righteous. They will all consider themselves to be the one in the right, the one who sees the path to peace, who can preserve order. Muin believes that he knows what is best in order to maintain order, and that he must be the one to use the most violent power because of this. This exchange sparks further talking in the crowd. A warrior calls that Muin is right. They need to claim the Norse weapons. Another shows concern about getting sick, but that is met with one writing off the disease as an empty threat, and another claiming his ancestors' spirits will protect him anyways. Another concern rises about how getting those weapons will lead to infighting between the tribes over them. But that is met with another saying that so long as those with pure hearts get those weapons, they will be able to use that force to make peace. And this leads to the question of who says who is right? Who can have that power? Which ultimately leads to all the warriors fighting over which tribe should make that claim. Misiek tries to call for everyone to calm down, but Muin seizes the opportunity to demand that everyone seize the Nords and prevent them from preparing an ambush. This causes the warriors to stop, realizing that Thorfinn and his group have already left. Nisquaji runs, followed by Bug-Eyes, Einar, and Thorfinn. Bug-Eyes tiredly stops out of breath as Niska calls out for him to keep running. Niska desperately tries to call back to all of them, saying they need to run. They will lose to Misekwe and Muin. They will be killed. Thorfinn looks to Einar, who instead of running has angrily been marching forward. Thorfinn tries to speak to him, but Einar begins on his own. He says that he can't agree with Thorfinn's decision to evacuate, that none of the people who cleared this land will agree either. He tells Thorfinn he is the only one who could make that decision to leave so quickly. And Thorfinn, with a pained expression, asks Einar if he thinks that decision didn't hurt him. Einar says it just doesn't hurt Thorfinn like it hurts him. That Arneid's village is less important to him than keeping his vow not to kill. And it is so important, of course, that Einar brings up the name of the village, Arneid's village. This is something emotionally so important to him that's just not the same for Thorfinn. But Thorfinn, in a panel here filled with light, says that if you think someone is an enemy, they become an enemy, and that the Ulnu are not their enemy. But Einar, in a panel filled with darkness, says that is stupid, knowing that what they just saw wasn't just a party. And amidst this tension, Bug-Eyes notices something in the tree line. He yells to Thorfinn, pointing to their pursuer, whose arrow is knocked and drawn at them. Thorfinn's dream was in vain. War has begun. Okay, there's a lot to analyze and talk about here, but let's start, of course, with the war. And as I anticipated, as I've been anticipating, it has finally begun. Since my very first chapter review, when 187 released, I have been talking about exactly how I saw all the pieces being set up to inevitably cascade into war. Some people had doubts. Some people thought the series might end peacefully, or even worse, some people thought it would be boring because of it. But this has always been where it was going. You can tell, especially if you watch my earlier reviews, you can tell the seeds were being planted very, very early on. There were always little concerns that I knew would get blown up. And now, almost exactly 2 years later, we are here. Like in reality, war is complicated. There are people who sincerely mean well and want to avoid it, but there are also people who act in bad faith with ulterior, selfish motives. While I was able to predict many of the factors that led to connections with the Gitpi tribe ultimately breaking, which are heavily based on fear and miscommunication, resulting in an uncontrollable tension that culminates in violence, at the same time, I did not expect Yukimura to have this conflict branch out so much from the Gitpi tribe in this way. But I believe this is a way of making an important acknowledgement about the native people in general. Since their introduction to the story, the Ulnu have been depicted as hopeful, albeit wary people whose desire for peace was aligned with Thorfinn's group. This led to the Ulnu being very open to Thorfinn's idea of Vinland, where the two groups would coexist and eventually become one people who will found this nation of peace. However, this also made the Ulnu as a people out to be very separate from the ideals perpetuated by Norse society, setting them up to be a peaceful group who would ultimately be pushed too far. And while this more or less aligns with the Gitpi tribe, it is also important to understand that they are not representative of all native people. And now, by expanding the Ulnu world through the introduction of the tribes Misekbekwe has gathered, Yukimura acknowledges the reality. Far to the west, across the sea, is a land with warriors, cut from the same cloth as the Norse. Since the beginning, Thorfinn's dream of Vinland was that it was a place free of the Norse society that perpetuates war and slavery. What he did not fully understand, or maybe just couldn't accept, is that Norse society was born from the same human flaws that created the tribes who now march on his home. In Vinland, these tribes already fight wars amongst themselves, and Arnade's village has just become another resource they need to contest. Now, among the complex reality of his own people, Misekbekwe has lost all control and must face the war of his own invitation. Now, speaking of the Ulnu world being expanded, let's talk about Gauki and the raid. So first, let me say this character design is very good. Generally, the new characters have been pretty basic in design, because only 4 of them really were real characters, and the rest were kind of just background characters. And on top of that, those 4 characters were all meant to be peaceful people living civil lives, so their clothes were generally very simple. Even though Misekbekwe, for example, was an instigator, still he is someone trying to maintain peace, and the simple everyday design of his outfit kind of communicates that this is not a war person. But now with Muin and Gauki here, we are seeing more varied designs of characters who are dressing to stand out and intimidate. The feathers on his headband and the cloak he wears here just make him look like a monster, especially in the harsh lighting. His personality seems a bit of a loose cannon like Garm, but without that same self-aware silliness. This creates a far more intimidating character immediately. And this loose cannon feeling is very apparent in his decision to go rogue against the other tribes and raid the village to get ahead. And of course, the raid itself is just terrifying. The decision to have this rogue tribe make a move regardless of what happens at that meeting is a smart way for Yukimura to increase just the chaos and discomfort of this war. With how this war has been very carefully set up over the course of so many chapters, it almost began to feel like we could see what was coming. But with this, Yukimura reminds us that war is not so predictable. It is a complex thing perpetuated by countless factors, and it can arrive right where you feel safe at any moment. And that, of course, brings back feelings of Askeladd's raid on Anne's village in the prologue, just the sudden, unnecessary, brutal violence. This also gives us the unforeseen pillaging raid that Ivar has constantly insisted would come, ironically being committed in search of the sword Ivar swore would protect them all from it. While these people are ultimately here because of greed for what the Norse have, it cannot be ignored that it was countless mistakes leading up to this that invited them in. If Thorfinn was so unfortunate as to settle near one of these tribes instead, maybe such a raid would have come without any mistakes needing to be made. But still, the peace Thorfinn was able to create with the Gippi tribe was real, and I believe it had the potential to flourish if properly nurtured. However, Misekbequist's fears have invited war into their peace. And now, this raiding party marches towards Cordelia. Since very early on, I have been saying that Cordelia is an important character to pay attention to, and now it seems we are on the cusp of that build-up. The corruption of innocence has been an ongoing background element of this arc, not just with the next generation of children as they're desensitized to war by all the adults' talks of it, but also with Cordelia. By having inherited her father's physical build, Cordelia's soft and gentle nature holds back a dangerous potential for violence, and this makes Cordelia's strength a sort of Chekhov's gun. And I think being the one thing standing between these warriors and the vulnerable Carly and Gudrun will finally push that gun into being fired. Still, even if she doesn't fight, maybe she chooses to stand guard and just be a barrier. Or maybe she runs. Either way, I'm certain this will be a heavily defining moment for her character, and we will get a lot of insight on why Yukimura chose to make this character to begin with. And now, speaking of character-defining moments, let's talk about Einar. Through his conversation with Thorfinn after they escaped the war meeting, it is now completely clear that Einar has no intention of leaving Vinland. I won't go over all my points again. In the last review, I went into great detail about why this is a perfect development, but I am just really glad to see Yukimura is committing to making this fracture. I don't think this by any means is a sudden end to their friendship, nor do I even consider this Einar turning on Thorfinn. This is not a betrayal. Their friendship is too strong, and this situation is too complicated for that to be the case. Until now, Thorfinn's vow to run has always been in line with what Einar thought was best. The war they were in before, in Kettle's Farm and in Baltic, these are all wars that had no personal connection to them. They're wars that they were forced into or stumbled upon, and running away from that, of course, that's what Einar wants, because what he was promised was that they had somewhere to run to. a place where there is no war, a place where he can safely create a home and not be afraid of losing it and not have to defend it. Now, that is no longer the case, and Einar cannot ignore what his heart tells him. Whether they like it or not, what they had just seen was enemies preparing for war, and he can no longer listen to Thorfinn tell him there is no such thing as a bow is drawn on them. Overall thoughts, just wow, this chapter was absolutely insane. And despite my endless predictions, Yukimura has managed to completely shock me. And this is the tight writing I expect from a Yukimura climax. This next stretch of chapters will be the payoff to everything this arc has set up. Much like the start of the battle on Kettle's farm, we are likely rapidly approaching the end from here. Still, although the war has officially begun, there are still some lingering elements that have yet to be delivered on. And first, of course, is Gudrid. The baby still has not been born. I have to say, it must be next chapter for sure, right? But with everything going on outside, it might be even more. And of course, my idea of the birth being in parallel to the first death surprisingly didn't happen here. But this only tells me that there's an even more important moment that Yukimura is saving it for. And what this chapter makes me realize about that moment is that it's not a moment. Just as war is not decided in a single moment, a birth is also not a single moment, or at least it can't be boiled down to one. This birth is not meant to parallel a single death like I anticipated. It is trying to instead parallel the battle itself. Over the course of this battle, Gudrid will be fighting her own battle. Both are difficult and painful, but only one will produce hope, meaning, and beauty through new life, while the other brings nothing but death and destruction. And this is exactly what I would expect from Yukimura in hindsight. Yukimura has an incredible respect for motherhood. And to boil down birth to just a single moment, it is a long process, and as a father who has been there for the birth of multiple children, he knows the respect birth deserves, and he plans to fully depict it. Rather than making this parallel be the heralding of the war, Yukimura is going further and making it the war itself. Another thing yet to be delivered, the Gippi tribe. So aside from Nisqually, the Gippi tribe themselves have been left completely irrelevant to this battle. Considering all that has been set up, I highly doubt they, especially Polmuk, will not take part. I didn't picture Polmuk ever starting this battle himself, but with all the pain they have already endured from the disease and with the battle having already started, I could very easily see him decide that he must force them out to protect his tribe. If there ends up being more than a single battle, too, and the other tribes take significant losses after this first attack, that would absolutely serve to sway Polmuk. Just in order to fully pay off on this tragedy, I think we need to see Polmuk and the Gippi tribe join against the Norse and fully turn friend on friend. Speaking of the Norse, Ivar's group. Similar to the Gippi tribe, we have Ivar's group who are not involved in this initial fight. The village is quite big, but they will absolutely see that fire from the burning house, just as Gauki said, and they will head that way. I am very interested to see how they, especially Ivar, react to their concerns being seemingly justified by this attack. Considering the setup of Gauki looking for the sword as well, I think it is inevitable that Ivar will confront him. And in that moment, the harsh reality of how little they know of war will set in. Of course, I'm especially interested in seeing how the calm, calculating Stork reacts to the fact that war has come, despite his confidence that he could manipulate the situation without consequences. And, of course, Hild. She is the other factor I was absolutely sure of, that her decisions would be the catalyst for this war starting. But now, for another chapter, she remains unnoticed in the shadows, this time not even making an appearance to us. I felt like her decision to prevent this war by using violence was a perfect opportunity to show the consequences of attempting to wield righteous violence. But now, the war has started regardless of that decision. I want to see what Yukimura plans to do by leaving her out there. Like with the baby, I trust she is being saved for the right moment. But right now, this might be the only thing I'm kind of disappointed in. Still, with my idea of Hild's mistake leading to the big moment where war begins, I think I was set up for kind of a cruel reality. There was no big dramatic moment that signals the start of the war. No single point we could point to and say, hey, that was the moment it was decided. In reality, that's hardly how it goes, is it? Just as casually as tension builds, so casually does it culminate in violence through unstoppable momentum. The mistakes and the decisions were made long ago. And honestly, the most painful part of this chapter for me, I just got back from Toronto. I got to meet Yukimura, and he shook my hand knowing he was about to drop this bombshell on me. So thanks, Yukimura. Thanks a lot. But next chapter, predictions. So Yukimura will be taking a hiatus next month, so the next chapter is currently slated for November. Not only that though, Yukimura has successfully thrown a wrench into my expectations. So, at the very least, for next chapter, there will be two situations I think must be followed up on, which are the attack on Gudrid's home and the attack on Thorfinn's group. Like I said earlier, I think this is the moment Cordelia is pushed to use her strength in order to protect Carly and Gudrid from this coming attack. I'm very eager to see how this character defining moment for her plays out. I expect a lot of focus on her potential for brutality. In fear and panic, she will exhibit terrifying strength. I do not think this will feel out of character, though, for her gentle nature. Although she fainted at the sight of Misekbekwe's hand being cut off, I think that could even be a moment of desensitization for her. But more importantly, I think that the adrenaline of this moment, life or death, will let her power through that fear, while leaving her horrified at what she was capable of. And for the attack here on Thorfinn's group, now that the war has started, nobody feels safe here, aside from Thorfinn, if we are to assume history will be followed from here. I don't think Einar could possibly die yet, at least not in this situation, just considering how this disagreement has given him a very important role to play in the future of this story. But it does feel like Bug Eyes is in the most danger here. Killing the comic relief character to darken the tone is a classic writing trope that I wouldn't be surprised to see used here as well. But also, now that the time to talk is seemingly over, Bug Eyes' role as the interpreter between these two peoples makes for a symbolic cutting of the connection between the Norse and the Ainu by killing him. And then Niska also serves a similar purpose as a connection between the two peoples, but for some reason I just don't think it feels right to kill her here. It just, I feel like it doesn't make sense. With our very limited cast of Gitpi tribe characters, I don't think she will just be killed. But what I do think is that the attack at the end of this chapter here will be where Hild intervenes. I think it makes a lot more sense for Hild to follow Thorfinn out of the war meeting, but it's also possible she might stay back to target the leaders like she originally planned. But with a bow drawn at them from this distance, it would make sense that Hild would be the one to stop it from the shadows. But this brings to question, will she use full lethality? Or will she try to only injure them like she did in Baltic? I don't think Hild's first kill is something that would be done lightly. So I don't think she will take a life unless it has been properly built up to. So if she does intercept this attack, which I think she will, then I think she will do so without killing. At least to start. But in general, now that war is undeniably in front of him, what will Thorfinn do? I am certain that no matter what, Thorfinn will stick to his vow not to kill, and suffer the consequences of doing so. Some people seem to think this is where Thorfinn is going to break, maybe not in this exact moment, but during this battle in general, he will go back on his vow not to kill. But I think there is far more meaning to be drawn from him fully committing to his beliefs and facing the consequences of it. Still, I do think this will force Thorfinn into having to defend himself and others. And he will try to do so non-lethally just as he did in Baltic. What many seem to misunderstand is that despite not thinking any violence is righteous, and not accepting violence as a solution, Thorfinn has never been someone to sit back and watch while innocent people are hurt, and he will not suddenly become that person now. However, as strong as he is, Thorfinn cannot subdue an entire army non-lethally without casualties. Probably not lethally either. In the past, we have seen him defend people from groups of warriors, but he just is not someone who can be in multiple places at once. And this will force him to make some difficult choices. But we gotta wait through a hiatus until then. I am just shocked at what this chapter is able to do, and I am so excited to see this continue. My anxiety is through the roof and will just continue to do so. So, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.